Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of LIMA Online. I'm here tonight again with Martijn van Boven. Welcome, Martijn.
Thank you. Thanks for
having
me again.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you back. And I think you deserved it because last time I was telling that you invited yourself, but now I fully invited you for yet another edition. So I'm happy we can do this again together.
Yeah.
And I gave you a carte blanche again, and you came up with a program that revolves around the slicing of time. We're going to see some old video artworks, some medium specificity, some morphing and stretching of time by software, hardware, and other types of optical means. So yeah, do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me it was sort of maybe going back to the works that I feel very comfortable with, and also works that some of them they really sort of meant quite a lot for me also in the development of my own artistic career. But I thought like it would be nice sort of to see like how you can sort of go through the archive and collection of LIMA and figure out like all these different types of works where artists use all these different types of techniques, let it be hardware wise. Some really nice old laser disc works are in there as well. Some GPS based analysis, like maybe some old school sort of animations, but basically just to show like all these different types of manipulation of the perception of time and space. And those two terms are quite broad and abstract, but for me it was also just to bring back some really great works, such as from Semiconductor and Esther Pollack and Dries en Verstappen. And so I tried to sort of put them together in 4 blocks, and I've tried to see if I could sort of combine them in a way that they maybe visually have the same analysis towards sort of the perception of time, but maybe also the way through the cinematic or electronic means they utilize.
Yeah, even conceptual means sometimes some relate way more to space and the people's behavior in the space, and some are way more abstract and manipulation of signals, so to say. Yeah. So I think we cover quite a broad scope, and we will jump a bit back and forth in time. So that's also nice. I really like the way you link quite like historical works to more actual pieces. And I think your favorite work of the LIMA collection is in there.
Is that so?
Yeah, at least that's what you told me. It's in block 3. The Kiss by Artists.
Yeah, it's true. That is true. Yeah. That is one of my most favorite works. Yeah.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that one
later. So maybe indeed, like, tell us what we're going to see in block 1, and here there's a beautiful visual repetition going on. So spoiler alert.
First one is Sonar by Anouk de Klerk. Very short piece, black and white, 1.5 minutes, and then I think it sort of nicely evolves into the second piece by Gerco de Ruiter, Crops. It's like 3.5 minutes, and then we end with Kennemer Duinen, the Kennemer Dunes by Dries en Verstappen.
No, I think that's in the... Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
no, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Yeah, we've been sort of ping-ponging back and forth, like which pieces are going to be where. And I think like the work of Anouk, I think it's just a great piece to start with. Start black and white, simplicity, forms, and then dive into the work of Gerco. I think it's kind of a nice piece because he was like one of the first ones who utilized the Google satellite images. Very tedious work. I still don't know if he done that all manual by sort of sorting out all these images. Well, you will see it by yourself, but and then a very contemplative work by Dries en Verstappen. So
Yeah, and I think for the first two works, the soundtrack also plays a very important role, and they both worked with like additional sound designers, musicians. Anouk worked with Oji Ikeda, and Gerko worked with Michel Banabila. So I think that also really adds also in the way image and sound like coincide or really bring it to another level.
And those are also pieces who work really well if you see them on a big screen. So if someone does have the ability to use a projection tonight, you should. And also
and put the volume up and the screen big and
exactly. Right. I would say roll tape.
And welcome back. And thank you, Martijn. Yeah, I really enjoyed the contemplation of Kennemerduinen, that we were even wondering how did they do that, because it's so extremely well done. I think this work only works because of its technical mastering, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like a very sort of a very simple condensation of time, and which, I mean, of course, you can easily achieve with sort of long exposure shots or any kinds of time-lapse video recordings. But yeah, it's just, if you actually really start to sort of think about it, it just brings a very yeah, what you said, like sort of contemplating emotion, if you will. I mean, it's I think the way they've actually were able to sort of actually not make you think about sort of the technicality of it, and just sort of the appreciation of the landscape. I think that's really extremely beautiful, how they achieved it. Which I think it's always sort of the standard of the work of Dries en Stappen. I mean, that's what I really appreciate about their works. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's also what can be so interesting about technology, is that it makes you look at the outside world or the real world in a way you couldn't see without this technology, but it doesn't at all put this technology at the front. It's even entirely invisible. Like, we don't at all think of technicity. Oh, that's a word I never mentioned. If you see the work, because you really like feel like you're watching a landscape.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I'm reading at the moment like a book on it's called sort of In Search of Memory, which is about sort of the way the brain actually works on the most fundamental level, on sort of the neurological chemistry, biochemistry level. And there's also one part where they talk about sort of the way space as a sensory activity is sort of built in your brain, and which I never really thought about, is that we can only sort of perceive space through other sensory activities, through vision and sound and smell and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then your brain puts that into some kind of a spatial map. And I think that's also something what you see really good at that work by Dries en Stappen, is that yeah, you really can sort of construct these spaces. And that's also, I think, really beautiful. I think with most of the works is that there are so many types of methodologies how you can sort of represent or maybe classify, or how you can encode space, and how you can slice up scales of times. And maybe that's a nice sort of segue into the piece of Esther Pollack, like Amsterdam Real Time, which we're going to see in the second block. Yeah, I think maybe that was one of like the early kind of GPS drawing works.
It was the very first work of art with GPS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what is really amazing about that work, it also really gave you sort of the sense that sort of this GPS drawing, it has this very specific kind of digital pencil drawing style. It's very sort of informal. You know, there are not like very sort of sharp digital sort of forms and graphs. It has a very, like these, it's almost like doodles. And I think that's why that really wanted to sort of include that piece. And also because I think Esther always has been sort of at the forefront in sort of experimenting with these type of new technologies. And the second one is by Semiconductors, great arts duo from the UK, Time Out of Place, which is also sort of like a software-based piece where they use different types of software scripts to sort of condense different types of timescales, and you get like this really beautiful blurring and smears of colors of sort of city traffics. And yeah, I would say Roll tape.
and welcome back in a more or less normal perception of time and space. Yeah, Martijn, we were talking about the work of Semiconductor when, whilst we were watching it, and it looks actually very complex, but you said the technique is quite understandable. Maybe you can explain what happens technically, what we're looking at.
Yeah, so I think what they've been doing there is sort of really utilizing something that is sort of very common in, let's say, digital video processing. It's that before, let's say, you send an image to the screen, it needs to be sent into a buffer. And that's, let's say, where all the pixels are being sort of stored and then sent out all at the same time, so that it becomes like one nice complete image. But you can also sort of manipulate, let's say, the way you store information into the buffer. And so then what happens is that, let's say, all the parts within the image that don't change over time. So you can make a comparison with the previous frame and the current frame, and then you keep those the same. And all the parts that are moving, you basically store them, and then you get like this sort of smearing effect. And which is also sort of the basic principle on for, let's say, machine vision, how cars, for instance, can detect moving objects. So that's also by sort of comparing the previous frame and the current frame, and then see if something has moved, and then you can get like these moving vectors. And yeah, and I think that's something really beautiful. What they sort of utilized is sort of yeah, it's sort of by sort of software manipulation, and also like really showing like where's the difference between sort of photography, sort of film, where you have like one complete frame, which is you can't really alter it, maybe through chemical means. You can change the color, and then yeah, maybe through optical effects. But this is like a really typical kind of combination of software and hardware manipulation of space. Yeah.
It did make me think of like the very first photograph, so to say, in which you have a sort of the opposite effect. Everything that moved wasn't visible. So we see an empty boulevard because everything was moving. And here what moved is actually taking a more dominant visual space.
Yeah, in that sense, it's like the opposite of what you wanted, let's say, with photography, where you wanted to have like a complete still and a very pristine image. And here you sort of make a combination between still photography and motion capture.
Yeah, and it also made me think of another work by Dries and Verstappen. We also just talked of it, which is like I thought it was called Deep Dive, but I'm not sure. That you start with a photograph and then you start zooming in, and it starts to be an endless landscape. So there's no limitation of like a pixel or a minimum visual entity, but you just like endlessly go on. So this is also this morphing of a visual output.
Yeah, it becomes this sort of this cinema of transformation. You know, it's sort of through continuously morphing and having certain kinds of algorithms that can keep going on and on, as long as the machine is plugged into a wall socket and is provided with electricity, and maybe you have enough hard disk space, then you just can keep going. And yeah, and you were saying about like sort of my favorite piece from the archive, and I was like, oh yeah, which one was that? But it's one of my favorites. But I think it's so special about the upcoming piece. It's the Kiss by Rafael Montañez Ortiz. It's from the late 80s, something like that, maybe beginning with the 90s. Don't know really.
I thought it was 84, but let me check that.
Yeah, I'm not a historian, that's for sure. But I mean, for me, it's like
86.
86. Okay, yeah. Early late 80s. And yeah, I mean, I think it's like one of the most sort of obscure types of manipulation that you can sort of achieve with laser discs. And I think it's a pity that laser discs really never took off. I mean, originally the laser disc was intended to replace film, and it was actually before the invention of the CD. that Philips was already sort of thinking about recording images on a disc, and so actually the concept of a laser disc is actually much older than we actually know. But it's such a hard and difficult medium to work with, and but it's a beautiful medium. I mean, it's the size of a LP, of a standard sort of record player, and and it's sort of physical, but at the same time it's also digital, and it's just before that moment of sort of miniaturization of storage media. Like now that we have like USB sticks and the cloud and the storage space is not something that we think about anymore, but. I think what's so great about this work from Raphael, he made like quite a few of these works, is that he sort of starts to work with sort of the addressing the position of the laser on the disc itself. So you could make these very weird sort of skipping back and forth and very precise. With you could do it with video, but it would be such a tedious job because you had to sort of slice every frame and then move backwards and then slice it and copy it, and because now you have like a laser disc, and it's much easier just to do this sort of manipulation of like frame by frame alterations and really making these really odd kinds of movements, and and it becomes like a very transcendental piece. It starts and it just has this very syncopic rhythm, and it's great. I think it's a very unique kind of work.
Do you know what the sound is? Is that like the original sound?
It's also the sound on that corresponds with the frame,
okay.
And that's also quite unique because if you have, let's say, a videotape, the sound and the video signal are not really sync, so to speak. They're not on the same spot on the tape itself. But with video disc, they are. So they are both really sort of sound and image are on the same physical location on the disc. And that gives this really weird kind of
it's super striking.
And after that we're going to watch like very sort of modest work by Thomas More, Realm Part 1. I think that's part of a series he did on sort of analyzing his image library. And what I think is really great that this is more like some kind of a data visualization, if you will. It really shows sort of the massive amount of photos and how photos are being stored within the computer memory, and how you can sort of then translate sort of the visual space into a data space, and what's the size of, let's say, data, and how you can sort of then visualize data. They're two pieces totally unrelated to each other, but I think they'll all work together. So I would. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. I was thinking, Martijn, there is actually quite, the works do have something in common, and that is that in both ways, this medium gives space to an older, like it implements or gives a new way of looking at an older medium. So in the first, we see cinema being incorporated in the Laserdisc, and here we see photography being incorporated in video, moving image, digital video. So you didn't know that, but actually you were spot on.
I just didn't look at that way. I was just like very much focused on like, okay, what kinds of ways there are, how artists have been sort of manipulating sense of time. It's funny because sometimes I even don't look so much at the content of, or maybe even, let's say, the cultural meaning of an image. I can get caught up like the way how it's being sort of produced, or how artists have been sort of building their own sort of software or hardware systems, or maybe their own sort of cinematic apparatus. Jesus.
Oh, that's my technicity. Okay, I'm not even gonna try. But what I also think that both works have is like a huge sense of craftsmanship, actually, because they're both like, there's quite some work at stake of like minutes, like making, like building up these pieces. I don't know actually how it is to work with a laser disc, but I know for Thomas, like he implements every photograph into this rigid scheme, which then becomes a moving image. And
I think that's also sometimes that we forget, is that we always tend to think like the moment when something becomes digital, that it becomes automated, and then it becomes very easy, like a push on a button, or maybe you just have to write some piece of code and then it's all done. But I think also, even if you think nowadays, I think a lot of the digital cinematography, there's quite a manual labor involved, and it's also very it's very time consuming. It's very you need a very sort of good sense of the understanding of a piece of technology, and it's just not like opening up Photoshop and applying a few filters or some kind of a face filter on Instagram whatsoever. I do find that sort of interesting, is that there is still this sort of really big distinction between, let's say, commercial consumer type of applications of digital manipulations of image and sound. And then there's still this kind of labor intensive work that Thomas applies, where you still really have to know, like, okay, what am I aiming for? What am I trying to show? What's my research? And then accepting that the outcome is that it will take you months and months and months of sort of doing very labor intensive work. And I think that's also what I find so great about the work of Raphael de Kis, is that although the machine is helping you to achieve a different kind of understanding of time and sort of visualizing time, you still need a really good understanding, like how you can sort of manipulate a machine to actually do that for you, because that machine was not built to play back a laser disc like that. And I mean that's always something that I've been sort of very much fascinated about, is sort of this continuous sort of investigation of artists on really trying to search for sort of hidden languages, visual, auditive languages that are sort of hidden in machines, and let them be hardware or software based.
Yeah. Already with your first part of your sentence, I directly thought of the bazookas, which often come back in any talk we have on art and on video art, and that's definitely the case for their work, like this interaction with the machine, with the equipment, and really like a collaboration between the two, I think.
Yeah, and it's also, I think the idea of the collaboration is also interesting because a lot of times machines sort of, or these kind of machines are sort of coming to you through, let's say, commercial companies, and they are sort of, produced in a certain way that sort of includes, let's say, economic trades-off, but also sort of interfacing. How can you sort of through buttons and dials, you can sort of navigate and sort of interact with the machine, and then that also sort of very much closes off how you can sort of play around or sort of discover different types of ways you can sort of express yourself with, let's say a videotape or a laserdisc or software programs and software interfaces. Yeah, that's also for me like what I really want to show, like the last block of videos. It includes for me like a work by Mark Burkett. That's also like sort of a laser computer experiment. The title says what it is. Combination of two different kinds of systems. So also, a computer system that's sort of being sort of, I don't really like to use the word hacking, but it sort of was sort of addressed in a way where the machine was sort of set up in a way it was not sort of intended to be used. And then a seminal piece by the Austrian-Dutch duo Remy, Belgique QE. And that one, it's all about sort of the showcasing the failure of a very famous video capture card that was sort of notorious for its failure. I thought it was like the Miro Motion capture card that came together with an Apple computer. And so that was sort of infamous of sort of failing to sort of able to sort of get the analog video signal in, and then what I was talking about, also like the sort of the frame buffer, and it would sort of continuously fail. And they, I think, were like the first ones really to sort of start to appreciate the whole glitching and error language that came out of that. Beautiful piece.
Yeah, what I also very much like about this piece, that it has a text plays an important role, but you never manage to really read the text. And once you know what's the text, it's actually describing what is happening in the image, but it's almost as a sort of subliminal messaging idea. So and often like medium specific of more abstract, glitchy kind of works are completely abstract, but I love the way they play with language also in this one.
And they did really great live performances. So they really had to sort of push the computer in a way to start to produce these errors. So the glitchy, they really had to sort of push it and sort of look it up. And sometimes that wouldn't really happen. So for a few 8 to 10 minutes at the beginning of the performance, you just saw like sort of regular video footage. And then I think her name was Michaela. She was sort of trying to really sort of push and figure out like, okay, how can I make this capture card sort of fail? And which was also kind of a nice sort of struggle for the artist. Beautiful piece, great. And last one is by friends of mine, Telco Systems, Escape Time. And this piece is, I rather would have shown, let's say, on a large screen, but I think we were also talking a little bit about this in between, is that what I like about this work is that you can also start to see actually sort of the time when it was produced. At least for me, it has a certain kind of software aesthetics that they were using at that time. And and I think it's just a great piece that also works really well live. But it's also meant to be like quite immersive, sort of presented with a good sound system. And it's also something like what I like about the work of Telco Systems, that they always have been sort of searching and sort of researching sort of different types of expression of software, and sort of the expression also of what it also says, like timescapes and different elements of composing with rudimentary sort of software systems. Yeah, I would say roll tape.
And welcome back. Yeah, that was quite a ride. I see you're being complimented quite a lot in the chat by your choice of works. Yeah, I was thinking we talked a lot about abstraction and all, but I think mainly the last work is, no, actually the work before also is a lot about the senses, like what can we perceive. And we talked already with Remy about like subliminal messages, but it's also at what point goes technology beyond what we can actually see with the human eye, and how do you sculpt with that or so, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking here at the chat, and I think Gideon, who said like time for that 4K remastered version. I think that's a really nice way of looking at it. Sort of the continuous sculpting of work, and how you can sort of continuously sort of keep working on that kind of abstraction work. And yeah, I mean, that's also what you see with the work of Remy. I mean, although it's, I think now already like 20 years old, sort of the recontextualization and also the sort of the reappreciation, I would say, of the aesthetics of the work. I think that's also, it's so fresh. It's just, yeah, it's insane. It's also the work of Mark. Yeah, it's sort of that work that sort of comes and goes for myself, sort of like, I sort of appreciate it, and sometimes a bit like, nah, it's a bit of a, I don't know, it's a bit of a one-trick pony. But then again, if you look at like sort of it has a very unique aesthetic to it, and also a very weird sort of sense of yeah, video manipulation, combination of sort of almost analog digital manipulation of video signal. Yeah, I was talking to your colleague José, like, oh, how was this produced? And like, I still really don't really know like what kind of procedures he used, but
the work of Mark, you mean now? Yeah,
yeah, of the laser computer experiment. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I mean, but still, this work, all those works that just work best if you just can project them like big, really big. I think it's time for some extreme big cinema. Like since KLM is gonna have anyways problems with their flights, we could sort of organize something in one of their airplane hangars and do some extremely large scale projections.
That's good. And then we invite Gideon to premiere his 4K remastered version, 8K remastered version, I was about to say. So Gideon, you're invited in Martijn's gigantic cinema.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is nice work to see big, but yeah, also it changes. Oh yes, Gideon is in. That's nice. Like seeing it on the screen or seeing it projected. I also think this works better if there's this light beam like going to the screen, because that's also something that can really change the perception of a work. If it's like an illuminated screen or projected on it. Gideon is ready tomorrow. So
good.
Martijn, hurry up with your gigantic cinema screen.
I have a, maybe that's a nice side note, like one of my students, Sjoerd Mol, third year student, he made a work for the international pier in Schiphol for all the international flights coming and touring the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering who would like to fly to the US now. But
yeah.
Anyways, and it's a it's basically like a cube sort of screen, which is 5 meter by 5 meter by 5 meter by 2.5 meter, and yeah, it's just like a very sculptural work. But I think it's also time now, after all these months, that people have been sitting sort of behind their private screens, maybe to sort of pump it up and see if, yeah. I think it's time that we quit sort of watching stuff on our private screens and go public again and make it more of a public event.
Sounds good.
A minimum of 8K next time.
Good one. I'm still gonna do this. So if there's anyone still wanting to watch online edition, I'm back next week, but Martijn isn't. He's gonna go dream big think big, act big, and unite people in the real space. But yeah, any
Thanks
like
so much, Ian.
famous last words?
No, thanks so much.
Don't quote Foucault again.
No,
We had that already.
Yeah, no.
No, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to see this selection and see this works from various eras come together in such a beautiful way. And thanks to all the artists, and also for watching and being present here with us. So yeah, see you in the real space, see you in the online space. Hope to see all of you soon again. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.